The Sikha we will be learning is in Parsha Vayikra, look at the Sikhas Chelik Chav Zayin, the first Sikha to the Parsha. In Hilchas Maisa Karbonis Paskin the Rambam Paskins in the halachas of Maisa Karbonis concerning a person who makes a neder of bringing a korban. Certain karbonis are karbonis chayva, karbonis that the person is obligated to bring for whatever reason. But then there is a neder person could donate. Sometimes it's called a neder, sometimes called a nadava. It depends which way he says it. But anyway, there is a concept of donating a korban. So when a person says, makes a neder that I will bring this and this type of korban, he has to bring that korban in order to fulfill his neder. Like the pasuk says, "Meitzes v'secha tishman," as the Rebbe will bring later. It says you should keep the words of your mouth. You should do like you vowed, like you promised. So you have to keep your promise. So there's a din of making a promise to make an neder, and you have to fulfill. Do it exactly as you said. What happens if a person is neder godel? He makes a neder to bring a korban, a big one. The heavy cotton, and he brought a small one instead. Leyotza is not yetzi. He didn't fulfill his obligation because he made a neder to bring a big one, and he didn't bring it. He brought a small one. What happens if the opposite? Cotton baby godel, if he promised to bring a small animal as a korban, and he brought a big one, yotza. He is yetzi. He did fulfill. Then I'm being given an example. Keitzat, for instance, Omar Areya La'ela Shlomim. If a person said, I promise to bring a korban eilo or a korban shlomim, keves, a sheep. Eilo is a type of korban that a person could donate. A shlomim is a type of korban person could donate. There are different types of korbanos, but these are things you could donate. And he said, I promise to bring an eilo and a shlomim, a sheep. The heavy ayil, and he brought a ram. Ram is bigger. A shenoder egel, or he made a net that he's going to bring a calf, the heavy shade, and he brought an ox. Or he said, Gdi, the heavy soyer. I'll bring a goat, and he brought a soyer, which is a big goat. Yotze is yotze. Der Mokir from the Rambam is beyond sich in the Kesef Mishnah, the Mishnah Menachos. The source of the Rambam is, as the Kesef Mishnah, the commentary on the Rambam, mentions that where does this come from? Where did the Rambam get his din? From a Mishnah in Menachos. What does the Mishnah say? This is exactly what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, Aneider Godel Behevi Kotten, if a person makes a neder, I'll bring a bigger korban, and he brought a smaller one, everyone agrees. There's no argument. Everyone agrees he's not yetz. He didn't fulfill his obligation. But cotton baby godel, if he promised to bring a small one and he brought a big one, here is a machlekes. Here is an argument. Like the Rabbana Yotza, the Rabbana say that it's enough. You did fulfill your obligation. Rebbe says he did not fulfill his obligation. When the Rambam passed with the Rabbanan, the Rambam who said that you are yetze, if you promised a small and you bring a big, you are yetze, he passes like the Rabbanan. And the Rebbe, by the way, adds, why did the Rambam bring examples? The Mishnah didn't bring examples. So the Rebbe says, the Rambam bring the dugmoyes. The Rambam gives an example that he promised a keves v'hebeyai, he promised a sheep and he brought a ram. He promised the egel and the heavy shade. He promised the calf and he brought an ox. Gedi v'hevi soyer. He promised a goat and he brought a bigger goat. Why does the Rambam give these examples? Also to teach us a din. Weil the Rambam paskent, ados was kotten v'hevi godel yotze, das blaze from beide seine von minechod. This din that if you promised a small one, you brought a big one, you are yetze is only if they're both the same kind. Aber nicht von zwei minim. If you brought two different kinds, he promised a small one, and he brought a bigger one, but from a different kind, then that you're not yetze, because it's a different kind. That's not the kind that you said. Later the Rambam says it clearly. So the Rambam gives an example that if it's the same kind, but you promised a smaller one, you brought a bigger one, you are yetze. We have to understand, we need an explanation. How is yetze? How does he fulfill his obligation? When he brings an ayel, for instance, he brings a ram, when he said, I'll bring a korban, a sheep, how could it be yetze? There is the commandment of Hashem, whatever comes out from your lips, you have to keep. And you should do as you promised. Since he said a small one, for instance, he said, I'm going to bring a sheep, you have to keep your promise. Like the pasuk says, you shall do as you promised. So if he said a sheep, small one, and he brings a bigger one, look, he brings a ram instead of a keves, a sheep, he didn't do what he promised. And they're two different, they're not two meaning, but they're two different things. And the Rebbe in Orah 9 brings the Gemara in Baba Kama, a different din. It says, Tlev and Nasa Ayil, if a person stole a sheep and it became an Ayil, or he stole an Egel, a calf, and it became a Sher, Nasa Shinu B'Yodid, that's called a change. The Gemara there talks about if you could keep it and just pay the money, or has to give it back. If there was a change, he doesn't actually have to give. But anyway, the Gemara uses this as an example that's called the change. So we see from there that a sheep is not a ram, a kevish is not an ayil. So how could the halacha be? How could the Rabbanan hold on the Rambam Paskins that you are Yetzer? So in front of them, so there are two ways the Rebbe says how you could explain the svara of the Rabbanan. Number one, Mitzad Gavra. One is connected to the person who made the neder. There's two things. There's always, like in a case like this, there is a person involved and the object that he is involved about. So looking from this perspective of the person, so we could say like this: B'shasarot neidig v'nakoten nenpen on as ein kavon in nigeven if to bring a dafka koten nit ken godel. When the person makes a neder that he's going to bring a small animal, we assume he didn't mean that he should bring a small one and not a big one. Not as I shall bring a nitvenike. What he meant, we assume, is he shouldn't bring less than the small one. And what gemeint as I shall bring the chalapochas cotton. When he said I bring a cotton, he meant I should bring at least that. And the Rebbe, when they bring them godel, so therefore if he brings the big ones, he fulfills this neder. Because he meant that too. In other words, when a person says a small one, we assume that he meant the big one too. And that's why the Rabbanan hold you're Yetzer, because you did what you meant. And the second explanation, to explain the reason why you're Yetzer, is mitzad hachefze, looking from the object, from the animal. The Gavre hotake gesogt and gemeint akot nakevskits. But not like we said before. This way is a different way. Really, when a person says, I'll bring a sheep, he meant a sheep and not an ayil. He meant a small one. So why is he Yetzer? The baldo beraz yesh bechlal merubah mu'at. It's a lotion of Rashi and Menachos. That bechlal, generally, yesh bechlal means included in the more is the less. Al derech yesh bechlal my Simon, like there's an expression that in 200 there's 100. Let's say if a person promises to give 100 to somebody, whatever the case is, and he gives him 200, does that consider that he fulfilled what he said? Sure it is. Because within 200 there is 100, so he gave 100. He gave the 100 plus. Same thing here. Yesh bechlal merubah mu'at. In the bigger one, in the more, there is the less. So when you have the bigger animal, you have the smaller one there, plus you have it more. He said, when I bring a godel, if he brings the bigger one, he brings a ram instead of a sheep, he's in them nichlal lakoten. So he did bring the sheep. He brought what he promised, but he just added. He's miskayim nitre, so he fulfilled his nether. So these are two ways to explain the svara, why if he said, I'll bring a small one, and you brought a big one, you're Yetzer. But the Rebbe says, it must be, this is not good enough answer. This is going to be a little bit complicated, why it's not a good answer. The Rebbe means like this. In the Mishnah B'Menachos. Some similar to this argument, there's another argument in Menachos, which is based on the same idea. What does it say there? It says like this. A person, when he promises to bring a korban mincha, mincha is a korban made of flour you put in oil. So the minimum shir is a nisorin. A nisorin amount of flour, which is the shir of a nisorin. The maximum that we can bring in one mincha is 60 esreinis. Now the thing is, if someone said, I will bring a mincha with a certain amount of esreinim of flour, he has to bring that amount. Let's say if he said, I'm going to bring with 10 esreinim, he has to bring 10 esreinim. If he brings less, he's not Yetzer. What happens if a person says, Pirashti mincha shel esreinim, I made a neder and I specified, I'm making a neder with a certain amount of how much esreinim is going to be. But I don't know, I don't remember what I said. So what should he do? So he has to do enough that for sure he will have brought what he promised. So it says, Yovi shishim asarin, let him bring 60. If he brings 60, no matter what he said. If he said 10, well, in the 60 is included 10, so he brought 10. If he said 50, so if he brings 60, the first opinion says, if he brings 60, then he's Yetzer. Rebbe says, Yovi menocha shel esreinis me'echad shishim. He has to bring one mincha with one esarin, another mincha with 2 esreinim, a third mincha with 3, a fourth with 4, etc. The fifth, the 10th with 10. He has to bring up to 60. There's so many korban he has to bring. Why? What's the reason why he says you're not Yetzer if you bring one of 60? But Tamach like Musa bring the Gemara Kamadei. The Gemara says different opinions. What the reason of the argument? Why the Chachamim hold that you just bring 60 and automatically it includes whatever you said, and the Rebbe says not. So different opinions, but Lapsof at the end, the Gemara says, Das Rav Asher. Rav Asher explains what is the reason for the machlekes. What are they arguing about? The same machlekes as we said before. Machlekes is bekoten v'hevi godel kemiflige. They're arguing in this concept. If you promise a small one and you bring a big one, are you yetze? Rabbana sov bekoten v'hevi godel yotzo. The Rabbana hold. Like we said in the Mishnah, we mentioned before, if you promise a small one, you bring a big one, you're yetze. And that's the exact case here too. V'zeh too, this also, this is going to be the Lashon of Rashi. Here, according to the Rabbanan, if you bring 60, so how much ever you said, you'll be yetze. Let's say, he gives an example. Let's say you promise, we don't remember, he doesn't remember, but let's say he promised 3, and he brings 5. You're yetze because you brought, like we said before, you say small and you bring a bigger, you're yetze. And Rebbe Sober Leyotze, Rebbe holds that if, like we said before, if you promise a big one, you bring a small one, you're not yetze here too. What's going to gain? You're going to bring 60, but maybe you promise 50. And when you promise the smaller amount and you bring the bigger amount, you're not yetze according to Rebbe. That's why you're not yetze. The Gemara is mamshech. The Gemara there explains. If look at B'chodazim, the Gemara asks, why do they have to argue in these two places? They argued at the korban. When you said a small one and you brought a big one, if you're yetze or not, the Rebbe says you're not, and Rabbanan says you are. Now you're arguing the same machlekes. When you promised a certain amount of flour and you're going to bring the bigger one, it's the same machlekes. Rabbanan hold your yetze, and the Rebbe says not. But none, the Gemara says it's the same thing. They said the Mishnah, the Mishnah we quoted. So the same Mishnah that says in the Mishnah, cotton that he said a cotton and he brought a godel. You're yetze, Rebbe says you're not yetze. And the Gemara answered, the Gemara says no tzricha. We need to tell them both. And the Gemara explains why if we say one of the two cases, we wouldn't automatically know the other. We would have found a difference. Maybe that if you say one case, the other one is different. The Gemara explains like this. The eat mebaha by medoches. Gemara says if the din would have been written just by the korban mincha that he promised a smaller amount of Yisrael and he brings a bigger one, I would think, and maybe over here the Rabbanan, you're Yaitse for a different reason. Because after all, the amount that goes on the Mizbeach is the same. If you bring a mincha of 60 Esreinim and a mincha of 2 Esreinim, or 1, there's only 1 handful of the flour that goes on the Mizbeach. So here you would say, the reason why the Rabbanan hold, if you said a smaller amount and you bring a bigger amount, you're Yaitse, because after all, the Mizbeach gets the same, whichever way it is. Like Rashi says, whether it's a big one or a small one, a bigger mincha or a smaller mincha, there is only 1 kemetz. So I would say maybe that's why the Rabbanan say you're yetze even if you brought more. Aval hosam, but in the case of the korban you said a small one, you bring a big one. The konafisha aimerin now. The bigger korban has more aimer. Aimer are the fats that goes on the mizbeach. So the bigger one, you will bring a different amount of fats to the mizbeach. Aimer made a Rebbe. Maybe I would think maybe they agree to Rebbe because it's different. Aimer in the godel, Rasha said in the fishim in the cotton, the aimer of a godel of a bigger korban has more than the small one. So I would be able to think le'ach another. He only made a neder for a smaller amount of aimer, not for the bigger one. So I would think, who come Rabbanan leyotze? Maybe here the Rabbanan hold you're not yetze. Then if you shamer in the day because there's more aimer in. So therefore, it's not enough if we would say benegei the korban mincha that from that we understand automatically for the korban, the animal korban, because I would think by mincha sof kosov it's all the same. The one kemetz, and by the korban of the animal there is a difference. This is more. Now eat by karbonis. If on the other hand it would say only by the karbonis, I would say the same thing, but the opposite direction. By here, I would think, Kam Rebbe. I would think, no, Rebbe says over there, you're not Yetze. For the same reason we said before. Maybe he says you're not Yetze because there is a difference. There is more Eimerim. Aval Baha, by the Menachos, by the Korban Mincha, Eimer Meidel Rabbanan, where there is the same Kemetz in both, I would think maybe Rebbe is made it. That's why he has to tell us both. But what does it come out from here? Since we see there is a Svarek, there is an idea, thought, the kiven aimerin, the godel and fishing with the cotton of ekel aimer leyoch another. Since there is more aimerin, more fats in the bigger one than the small, I would think that that's not what he meant, and that's why there's a svara that you are not yetze, even according to Rabbanon. Obviously, how could he say such a svara that the bigger one has more, and b'meila it's a reason not to be yetze maybe, but the more includes the little. So we see from there, from this Gemara, that we don't accept this svara, that the bigger one includes the little one. So the first svara that we said, the second svara, I mean, that we said, why the Rabban hold by the korban? If you promise a small one, you bring a big one, you're yetzer. So we said the svara because if you bring the bigger one, it includes the smaller one. But here we see not like that. Here we see that the Gemara gives a svara that the fact that there's more korbanos, it's the reason why that's not included. That shows that the Gemara goes with the logic that we do not say B'chlal merubah mu'ud, that included in the bigger one is a small one. Is nit mistaba. Since the Gemara says that svara, it doesn't sound right to zogen to say a later maskon is the chidish betamadim for vaskotn ve'vigodl yotzav b'chal merubah mu'ud. So we say lepeil mamish the rabbanan do say. So it changes the din. We said there's a svara not because it's more. And the end will be no, we don't care that more is the same as little. The little one is included in the more. We don't say that. So it's hard to say that when it came to the Maskon, the Gemara changed. And the Gemara says no. So it's hard to say that the reason why the Rabbanan hold that you're Yetzer, if you promise a small one and you gave a big one, because in the big one is included the small one. We don't look at it that way. Because then the same thing with Badeimanin. You give more aims, so what's the problem? We say it's a svara not to be Yetzer because it's more. But what's wrong? The less is included in more. Asim Gemara doesn't hold it. That's why the second svara is not accepted, not so clear. Al derech zeh is nicht glattig zu sagen, that the chiluk v'chidish and the tzrichas is, it also is not smooth, not simple to say, and that when the Gemara makes the tzrichas, why we need both, as the gavra hoch in order, and we're going to say maybe the maskona, maybe the reason is we said in the first way, because when he donated a small one, he didn't mean dafke small, he meant at least a small. And maybe that's what the Gemara is trying to say, why the din taka here is that the Rabbanan hold your Yetzer. It's hard to say that that this is included in what you thought. Haviminu is not included, it is included. Then if the pale he said a small one. So why would we think that when he brings a bigger one, the small one is included in his machshava? The first shot is not included in it. It's in his machshava. He didn't say that. He said, I'm going to bring the small one and bring a kevis. Why would an ayel be included? So it's not a simple svara to say, even though the Lashon is, we would think that he was made a neder, this is what he meant in this neder, but it's hard to say when a person did not say it, why would you think that that's included? In other words, basically the last thing that we just learned is to ask Akasha on the first shot that why are you Yetzer? Because probably he meant that too. Why would we say that? Probably he meant it. When he said kevis, why would he think he meant also a bigger one? It's not so simple to say such a svara. So we're back to the shaila. What's the reason why the Rabbanan hold when he said small and he brings big? You're Yetzer. Why are you Yetzer? He's not fulfilling what he promised. Not the exact same thing. Another kasha that I was going to ask. Like Beidei Fanimilal, according to both explanations we gave before, why the Rabbanan, the Rambam Paskins, that if you said small, you bring big, you're Yetzer. The two ways. One is that at the Gavrat Mechatchila Normak Ashir Mata, that the person who said it never meant only small, he meant at least small. Or the other beer, Yesh Bechlal Merubah Mu'ud, that when he meant small, but when he brings a big one, it includes the small one. These two, if you learn that's the pshat, is Mistaber Leimer Abishas Neder Kot Meged Lechatchila Bringen Agodel. So if that's what we say, whichever two pshatim we say, he should be able to do it Lechatchila. If we say he meant also a big one, so why can't he bring a big one Lechatchila? Or if we say that the small one is included in the big one, so why can't he bring a big Lechatchila? Okay, maybe Taki you could, but the Rebbe is going to show that from the Rambam is mashma that lechatchila you can't. And not only that, the Rebbe says, if lechatchila you could bring the bigger one, then you should bring the bigger one. Not only you could lechatchila, you should. The Rebbe explains why. Since the Rambam says, as a reitzel iskisatzme, if someone wants to be zeicha, wants to merit, Yokov Yitzhar Hara, he should bend his Yitzhar Hara. The Yarchiv Yodei, and he should broaden his hand. The Yovik Karbonim and Ayofa Meshuvach Beyesa Shebeis Amin. When he brings a korban, he should bring the best, the nicest, the best of that kind that he promised. Sheyovim and the one that he promised to bring, he should bring the best. I remember, but like it says in Torah, Hevel Hebig Amum B'Cheres Seinim B'Chalbein. Hevel, who brought the korban, and David accepted it. He brought from the best, from the fattest. So we see that you should bring from the best. Another pasuk says, Kol Chaylev Lashem. All fats is an expression of good, all good things. When you give to Hashem, you should bring the best. Nochmer, that's when the other things it says. Any mitzvah you do should be from the nicest. But the Rambam says even more, when you get to a korban state, not the Rambam, the pasuk, concerning a korban, it says a clear pasuk. We shall bring mifcha nidreichem. You should bring the best of your promises. So since if you're able to bring good, you should bring, that's the right thing to do. He's saying, if we're going to accept these two svaras we said before, therefore the choro uskumen should come out, aber no, their cotton is the chatchila, darfar akaponim kedai, as will bring a godom, sakuchel Hashem. Since there's no reason not to, because or he meant the big one too, or the big one includes the small one, so he could bring the chatchila. If he's able to bring it the chatchila, it means, so it should be better to bring the chatchila. And the Rambam says when it comes to a korban, you should bring the best. So the din should be that if you make a neder for a korban, for a cotton, for a small one, you should bring a big one. A kaponim, it would be worthwhile. But it's not mashma like that from the Rambam, but from Pashtas Loshon Rambam, from the way the Loshon of the Rambam is cotton, behevi godel yotza. The Rambam says if you said that it's small one, you bring a big one, you're yetzer. By saying you're yetzer, I'll skip the parentheses for a moment. Is mashma ados is nit kantil lechatchila. It's mashma that's not that you could do lechatchila. Nor blaze abedievet. If you did it, yotza, you're yetzer. That's what yotza means. And the Rambam, the Rebbe says in the parentheses, doesn't even say afilu nitvi zokt weiter legabe nedova. The Rambam legabe nedova, there's a special thing with the Loshon HaMishnah, like the Mishnah says, im noder keves, if a person made a neder, made a promise to bring a keves, a sheep, the nifsel, something happened, it became possible, you can't use that animal. So now you have to sell it and buy a korban with the money. Im rotza yovi b'dam avayil. If you want, you could bring with the money that you got for the keves, you could bring an aisle, even though an aisle is bigger. So there the Rambam also, but he says at least imrotza if you want. It's not chila you have to, but at least that if you want. Here the Rambam doesn't even say if you want. The Rambam says b'di'evet. He doesn't use the word b'di'evet, but he says yotza. So it's even less than that. It's not even that if you want. So according to the Rambam, you're only yotza b'di'evet. And the question is why? If the reason is because you probably meant it, so why can't you bring it l'tchila? And you should bring it l'chatchila because it's a better korban. Or if you say it included, so why shouldn't you bring l'tchila? Now, maybe the reason why you can't is like the chinuch says. And the Rebbe is going to show that the reason the chinuch gives in a different thing does not apply here. But the gates, the korban elevated was kumt evdalat chatoim. There is a korban called elevated. Why is it called elevated? It's for certain avedas, for avedas, that if you did any of these avedas, you bring a certain korban. It says if you don't have enough money to bring the animal, you're able to bring birds. If you're more poor, you can't even bring birds, can't afford it, you bring flour, you bring a korban mincha. Steht in chinuch. So the chinuch said, the Sefer HaChinuch says, when the gay of this inyan, as im ho'oni behevi kizba yisiro leyotzim, idei chavase. If you were poor and you didn't have to bring the animal, and you did bring the animal, you're not yetzer. I aren't yetzer. The reason is, he says, since the Eibishter made you poor. That means the Eibishter had pity on you and exempt you from bringing an expensive korban. Potter bekachim, pottered you from it. Ain't it bedin, so it's not right. Don't pressure yourself to bring more than you're required to bring. Because the Eibishter made you like this. The Eibishter wants you to bring a small one because he knows that you can't afford it. You're going to try and fight that, don't do it. So maybe you could apply it here too. That the reason why lechatchila you shouldn't do it, because if you plan to bring a small one, then why should you bring a big one? But the Rebbe says it's not the same. But the chinuch says by the korban eleviyed doesn't apply here. There is talking like korban. That you have to bring a certain korban you have to bring for a certain avera. What's number one, chiyav atayr olav? Nicht mitzad nidre was dafke bezeh pasvaras achinuch now. The reason you have to bring it because the Torah said you have to do it. So the Eibishter told you to do it, and he told you to bring a small one. So there, obviously, you better don't bring the big one. The Eibishter doesn't want you to bring one. The Eibishter allowed you not to bring, so don't push against what the Eibishter said. Number two, korban nosher v'oni v'chazayna minim shenim. If you're going to bring another korban, the korban from a higher level, you were poor, you're able to bring the birds. You're going to bring the animals. That's a different kind. Behemoths and aphes are different kinds. Bisdalidal is the least one. When the poorest person brings a mincha, but says asiris eifa selis, all it is a asiris eifa flour. So here, fashteitzach, don't bring the bigger one, the more. The chinuch says the Eibishter wanted you to get, but that's a different mean. Mashenke benitten the dar that's living a korban was number one machas nidre. But also we're talking a korban that you're not obligated to bring, something that you decided to bring. So where do we see that David wants you to bring the smaller one? You decided to bring a smaller one. And also that's wegen kotten vegodel and the result mean. We're talking about bringing a bigger korban in the same mean, which is not like over there. So b'meile, we can't compare it to what the chinuch says. So the shaila is, so why is it that you shouldn't bring lechatchila? If you said a small one, why shouldn't you bring lechatchila a big one? If the two reasons that we said before are true. So from that we understand what we said before is not true. But we said the first word that we assumed that when he said cotton, he meant at least a cotton, at least small, but also a big one. That's not true. Same thing, the second one that we said maybe in the big one is included a small one. So you really actually, if you bring the big one, you actually brought the small one, is a korban gadol nit nechol a korban cotton. It's not part of it. Because it would be one of the two things, or you meant it or as part of it, you should be able to do it. And we understand. We have a rule, yesh b'chal masai that in 200 includes 100 automatically. So why don't we say it here, and the big one should be included the small one? We understand. It's very simple. There, physically, it's like that. B'chal masai yesh moed b'mitzias. If you have $200, what shot you have 200? You have 100 and more than 100. The 100 is there. B'mitzias. Mashenkem b'didan in our case, when there is makir v'asher, is indemnity negil. In the ox, there is no calf. So here it's different. Here you're not necessarily could say in the big one includes the small one, and obviously it doesn't. And in order 36, the Rebbe refers back to order 9, where the Rebbe quoted the Gemara, where it says that if you stole a tle and it became a ayil, or you stole a calf and it became an ox, that's called a shinui. That's something else. So b'meila vice tuis from all this seems that we do not say that svara that in the bigger one is included the small one when it comes to a big korban and a small korban. But now back to the question. What is the time for them din cotton behavior godel yotze? What's the reason that if you promise a small one, you bring a big one, you are yetzawai? Let us verstehen behagdem abir in Lashon Rambam mit the Keseres Minchas Nedorim. We'll understand this by first explaining what the Rambam writes in the heading of Hilchas Nedorim. The Rambam, before every group of halachas, he writes a heading. What the halachas is made of, what's the mitzvah, and then he goes into the dinim. So in Hilchas Nedorim, he writes like this. And the mitzvah of Nedorim is, of vows, is, Sheyishmer meitzvos v'yasek mishnot. He should keep what his lips give out, what he says, and he should do as he promised. It's too long. It's a double. It's repeating itself. You should keep what your lips say. What that means, do what you said. And then he says, and do what you promised. And I want to note, in the beginning of the whole Sefer the Rambam, he has a whole list of all the mitzvahs. Besides what he says in the beginning of every group of halachas, he says the mitzvah. He says it as a whole long list. There Zog the Rambam blaze einian. There the Rambam Taka says one of them. One word. The mitzvah is that you have to keep whatever you give out from your mouth or give it out from your lips. The Rebbe is going to try to prove that there is this. It's not repeating itself, it's two things. But then you might ask if the two things, the way the Rebbe will explain, if it's two things, why doesn't he say the two things in the beginning? So the Rebbe said, because they say that the signal, the style of the Rambam is in that list, it's very short. So there he doesn't go into details. But here he says a double lashon, which probably has some meaning. Even though this is based on the words of the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Meitzis v'secha tishmer v'sisa kashet notarta." What comes out of your lips you shall keep, and do as you promised. And signenia shel Rambam b'sefer yad sumaytik zayin l'shenas aksuvin. The Rambam, his style in the sefer is to copy wherever he's able to follow the lashon of the pasuk. So maybe that's the reason why he writes it so long. The two things: to keep what you say and do as you promised. It's hard to say that he just follows the lashon of the pasuk and there's no difference, doesn't tell us anything new. It's not so simple to say that. That makes more sense to say as is nit stam hakef lashon. It's not just a repeat of the expression. There are two dinim by the case of a neder, which are two chiyuvim, two obligations. Number one, yishmer mitzvah. From the first part of the pasuk, you have to keep what you say. That's one thing. Base, the second thing it tells you, another Frat, another din, the Yasek Meshanodar, do as you promised, which is in the words Vasis, in the posting, the words are Vasisa Kashanadarte, you shall do as you promised. What are the two things here? They seem to be the same. The Rebbe says, no, Habir, but this is the Pshat. Yet Neders and Franz Venyon, every Neder, every vow has two things. Number one, Dibur Piv, the words from his mouth. The Verte was the words that he expressed, the words that he said. Then you have a second thing, the Teich from sein Dibur, the Neder. What did he mean? What were the contents of what he was saying? Then you have the exact words, and then you have the thing behind what he's trying to say. These are the two things in Posek. Number one is Meitzah V'Secha Tishmer. Die Werte was keep the words that you spoke. Follow, you keep exactly as you said, the words you said. And the second thing, you have to keep the contents, the meaning of what's behind, what's in the neder. So you have two things. This could explain the argument between Rebbe and the Rabbanon by Neder Kotn Vevi Godel. If you promise a small one, you bring a big one, whether it's Yotzer or Le Yotzer. If you're Yetzer or not, the Rabbanon say Yetzer and the Rebbe says you're not Yetzer. Now we'll understand what the argument is. How we learn this pshat in this, what the Pasuk says, you shall do as you promised. As we see, there are two things here. There's one thing is do what you said, and one is what you promised. Rebbe holds as man rechnet sich nur mit Meitzah V'Secha Dibur Piv. What's important and the main thing is the words that he used. The fact that you have to keep your promise is limited and it's classified by the words that you use. That's what counts. If you keep the words that you used, that is called keeping. That's the main thing. The Rabbanah hold, no, the main thing is that it should fulfill the teichen, the meaning of the neder. Mekayim sein teichen an neder, to fulfill the meaning the neder. Even though it doesn't really fit exactly to the words that he used. Das heißt, which means in simple words, der Mekayim sein dem neder bediuk, like Meitzah V'Secha is nicht likuva. The Rabbanan hold that to fulfill the neder based on the exact words that you knew is not likuva. It doesn't hold back. As the Rebbe will say, lechatchila, you should do that. Everyone agrees. Even the Rabbanan say, lechatchila, you should keep to the words. But it's not ma'akib, means it doesn't hold back. If you don't keep to the words, as long as you keep to what the teich, the meaning of the neder is, that is b'di'evet good. And the Rebbe adds, v'ozela l'shetasayo, and Rebbe and Rabbanan would argue in this idea, follow their own opinions in other places. Was man gefindt bekam case b'shas in the machlekes from Rebbe and the Rabbanon. We find in many places in Gemara when there's an argument in Rebbe and the Rabbanon. But in Aloshen v'shteit in the Torah, with the Chazal, with the Lashon Yoda, when it comes to a expression that the Torah says, or Chosn Chachamim said, or even expressions of people. So we find in many places, Ad Ladas Rebbe meint es kipshute mamish b'chol haprotim. Dvorim kiksovan. Rebbe holds that it means exactly the Loshen. So the word is what counts. According to the Rabban, doesn't have to be exactly according to the simple words. As long as it fits to the meaning of what's behind it, it's good enough. And the Rebbe says, like I spoke in other places, so in Order 39, it's worthwhile for people to look up. It's a very interesting Sikh in Chelik Zayin, and there the Rebbe brings quite a few machlokes in between Rebbe and the Rabban based on this idea that the Rebbe follows the words exactly, and the Rabbanan follow the general idea of what's behind it. So that's concerning the concept of what a neder is. So there's still not the Rebbe explained by a neder. The Rambam says there are two things. There's the words, and there's the neder itself, the teichen of the neder. And there's an argument which one is the main thing. Rebbe holds the main thing is the words, and the Rabbanan hold no, the main thing is the teichen. If you could do the words, that's what you should do lechatchila. But if not, it doesn't matter. The main thing is as long as you do the teichen. We'll go now to our case. Cotton baby godel. The person says, "I'll bring a small one," and he brought a big one. Hareya like keves baby. For instance, if he said, "I'm giving a sheep," and he brought a ram which is bigger, so we have the machlekes. Here we see what the machlekes is. Rebbe says, "You're not yetzer," and the Rabbanan says, "You are." It's all based on what we said till now. B'tzad meis v'sech, as far as the words coming out of your lips, of your mouth, he said, "I'm bringing a keves." What says nit keilel on now? A keves, which is a small one, is not, what he said doesn't mean an aisle. Because we said before, it could mean an aisle, but we came to a conclusion that the two biurim we said before aren't right. So b'meila, it's not included. Not in his kavanah, not in the korban. Ober metzadam teichen neder, so it's not included in the words. But what the neder means, what does is a neder l'Hashem? What's a neder? He's making a neder to Hashem. By the korban, the neder to Hashem, the Torah says it should be the best. And Kol Chayil Hashem, the fats should be Hashem to Hashem, and the best of your nedorim. So we assume that teichen nidre is to bring in a korban to Meibishn for me not saying. So we assume that what's the meaning behind this neder? To bring a korban to Hashem from this kind, cattle. Now Hitaka said keves, and he meant keves, not like we said before. He didn't mean. He meant like a keves, but that's the chetzonius superficial inyan that he said and meant. But what does he really mean? I mean, according to Hashem. Das was at the bepeil gesagt befif keves. The reason that he said with his mouth actually sheep is blaze mitzad amniyat zodis. It's for a side reason. For instance, here's an example. Why didn't he make a big one? Not because he cares that he doesn't want a big one. He meant to say keves because he doesn't have enough money to get a big one. Ober der mechuvim from keves is when he said keves. So what's deep down, what he meant deeper than what he said, is minat saying. Min of cattle. That's what he meant mainly. When the Rebbe, therefore, das Rebbe, as merechnet sich nor mit mitzvah, according to Rebbe, that we only consider the words, is godel b'mokim cotton leyotze. If he said cotton, small, and he brought a big one, he's not yetze. Sein neder given a cotton. He said cotton. Can nicht yetze sein nidre durchbringen a korban, berechel is another korban. So he can't be yetze by bringing a different korban, which he didn't say, which is a godel. Nitve makes v'secha, not like he said, because according to Rebbe, the main thing is the words. The das Rabbanan aber rechnen sich bike mit dem Teichen nieder. According to Rabbanan, we look mainly in what the neder is all about. That's the second half of the pasuk. Not meitzes v'secha, the words that come out, but siso kasher nadarto. You shall do as you made, as the neder, as you promised. So we have to look, what is the Teichen of the promise? When the Rebbe, therefore, afapes lechatchila zokmanit, as they'll bring in a godel, lechatchila we don't tell you to bring up it. Which means an ayel b'mokim keves, a ram instead of a keves. For Vibaldas Omakrom Tishma, since the Torah did say you should keep your words, he has to bring as his word said. So the Kasha Rebbe asked before, why can't he do it lechatchila? Because according to the other Biyurim Taki, he should be able to do lechatchila. But now, no, lechatchila not, because the Torah did say keep your words. Obe b'shas as heavy godler gebracht anayel. But the Chatila you have to follow the words. But if he didn't follow the exact words, but he brought a Nile, he's a Mekayim Vasisa Kasinatarto. So he is Mekayim, the main part, which is doing what the neder is. And he's Mekayim, the mitzvah Satira. So he's Mekayim, the words of the Torah. The Torah says the Sichikashan, and that's the main thing. Weil der Prat from mitzvah Sechatishmer is nitli kuva, because that detail, according to the Rabbanan, that you have to keep the words, that's not ma'akiv, that doesn't have to be. Chatila should do it, but it doesn't have to be. So now we understand the machlekes. Now I could even make geschmacker. Hamtik means make geschmacker, make it more clear, more like with more, I don't know, taste. That's what it means. More sweet to what the Rama holds. That he holds like the Rabbanon. Another point adding why the Rabbanon hold and B'meila were masbir what the Rambam holds, that you are Yaitse. If you set cotton and you bring a godel, you're Yaitse. Why? The Rebbe explains like this. By the mitzvah says what the Rambam zogt. When it comes to the mitzvah that the Rambam says, nidrei, that the person should mekayim his neder. So the Rambam says like this. When a person makes a neder, a vow, he has to keep it. And the Rambam adds, ben shoyim nidrei iser, ben shoyim nidrei hegdish. Whether there's two types in the Torah. Nidrei iser means a person makes a neder, a vow, to make something forbidden to himself. For instance, a person, for whatever reason, he says, I make a neder, I'm not going to eat an apple, or whatever. That's called nidrei iser. The neder, and he has to keep it. The Torah says, whatever neder you made, you got to keep it. That's nidrei iser. But then there's nidrei hegdesh. Nidrei hegdesh means that you make a neder that you're going to bring a korban. You're going to do something for the Bisamigdash, or something holy. So when the Rambam talks about that, bring the Rambam zwei psukim. The Rambam brings two psukim. The one pasuk where it says, in Parsha Keseitze, that what comes out of your lips you shall keep and you shall do as you promised. And then another pasuk in Parsha Mates, it says whatever comes out of your mouth you should do. The chilek between the two psukim, the difference between these psukim is like this. That first pasuk we said, what comes out of your lips you shall keep and you shall do as you promised. That's talking about a neder that you make for Hegdish, for a korban. Mashenken kechola yetzim pivyasim, but the other pasuk, which says whatever comes out of your mouth you shall do, retveg nidr iser. That's not talking about, that's talking about nidr iser. You push look in the Rebbe in order 46 says, look into Parshas. Parshas Mates is not talking about karbonis. It's talking about by making whatever neder you make, anything you take upon yourself, and iser, you got to keep. And in Parshas Teitz, it's talking about a korban. When we see in Rambam Gufa, we see in the Rambam as a minyan mitzvahs bereich sefer yad. When he counts the mitzvahs in the beginning of the sefer, where bring northern posik mitzvah sechet tishmer, when he only brings, as we said before, the first part of the posik, that whatever the first posik he brings, whatever your mouth, your lips say, you have to keep. Zokter as the mitzvah is lakayim modern kom ashiyetze b'misvosov mikorben ebedzdokeh. When he brings that posik, he says that you have to keep whatever you say, whether it's a korban or tzedakah or things like that. When they're monthly nidre iser, there when he brings that posik, he doesn't mention nidre iser. He doesn't mention a neder that just you aser upon yourself. So the Rebbe says here, well, Pia now, and based on what he said before, so what we said before in Sivov is moving der chiluk b'loshen apsukim. We understand the difference. By meitzis v'secha tishmer, by nidre isur, steht nor kayetzim piyase. By nidre isur, you only quote the posik, whatever you say you have to do. Schenke by nidre hegdish steht, zwei protim. By nidre hegdish has two things. Meitzis v'secha tishmer, whatever comes out your lips you have to keep, or sisikash and gadarto, and keep, and do what you promised. Why is this? Der chiluk zwischen nidre isur and nidre hegdish is the difference between making a neder of isur, ask something on yourself, and a neder that you make a korban is a difference. Very simple. By nidre isur schafft sich der teichon isur in ganzem mit dem diber odem. The isur that comes because of your neder is completely because of you. Lula is ein dibur in token isur. If you wouldn't say anything, it would be no isur. The father is by nidre isur faram blaze ein din, ein chiyuv. By when you make a neder to make something isur, there's only one din. What's the din? Kechola yetzim b'pivyasa. Whatever you said, you got to do. Vibaldas dibur shavdim. He says, since what you said makes something osir, you got to keep it. There's nothing but you. You got to keep it because of yourself, because you made a neder, and Torah says, whatever neder you made, you got to keep. When you make a neder of karbonis, for instance, you pull us a neder nordic chaleis. What the neder does, it makes it happen, but the object that becomes holy, why do you have to, like he promised the korban, why do you have to bring the korban? Because there's a din, you have to bring that korban. The Seisset means, as all chalzen if you machiyev shebemitziah shebeteirah. There's a chiyuv of Torah, if that when there's a chiyuv, that when there's an obligation to bring a korban, you have to bring a korban. What made your obligation? When you promised. But after you promised, what do you have to do? You have to have a chiyuv shel korban l'Hashem, or the shel zakah kitzvah. If you said, I'll bring a korban, now there is already a din that you have to bring a korban to Hashem. By Isur, it's only one thing. You got to do what you said. Here, Avad, it starts off with what you said, but after you said it, now, so Geshafen, the Rebbe says, it brought a chaleis that makes it, so what you said brings that what you said is chal. And what's chal? Chal means it takes place. Now there's a korban involved. So now you have to bring the korban. So it's a korban l'Hashem. Or if it's dokeh that you do as a mitzvah. So now it has its own thing. I spoke once at length, but the Rambam says in the end of Hilchos Nedorim, it says like this. If you make anyone who makes a neder like he builds like a private mizbeach, which you shouldn't. And if you did make a neder, you shouldn't have. But if you did make a neder, mitzvah the mitzvah is to nullify, go to a bezin or to a chacham, to nullify your neder. You shouldn't have a stumbling block. If you have a neder and if you don't nullify it, and you made a neder not to eat something, for instance, you might come forget and you might eat. Better to nullify the neder. But that's only when the neder of Isur. If you make a neder for hegdesh, then takert, don't nullify it. Keep it. Don't go ask, don't go to try to get it off. Unless you must. It says, I will pay my nedorim to Hashem. That's what the Rambam said. So the Rebbe says, he once explained, and that's in the Sichas Chet Chavtes, as you see in order 47. So the Rebbe explains there, by nidre hegdesh, when you make a neder of hegdish, when you make a neder of hegdish, now what happens here? Now, there's not only that you have to keep because there's a din neder that you made a neder, you have to keep your neder. Now you have to bring the korban. Now it became a din of korban. Shall korban, or the tzedakah case. What you made, but when you make a neder shalisa, I'm not going to eat the food. So it's something only on me that I have to keep it. It didn't change the object. But if you make a neder to bring a korban, now there's a chalais, that there is a din korban. Now you have to make a korban. When the far leishalem, that's why you shouldn't ask, you shouldn't try to nullify it. So this all fits to what the Rebbe said before, that by nidre isur, there's nothing but you. You made a neder, you have to keep. By nidre hegdish, this made that now you have to do it al tzachiyuv mitzadat eibishter. The other one is only a din neder. Not eating the meat, the apple that you made, there's no din. The Eibush doesn't care if you eat the apple or not. It's because you made a neder. But if you made a neder of a korban, now you have to keep it as a korban. Now there's a chiyuv korban. When the far is by nidre hegdish varam l'psak Rambam kedas Rabbanon echadin van sisik asher nedarta. That's why when it comes to nidre hegdish, the Rambam also quotes the posik van sisik asher nedarta, which means amis mekayim dem neder eib noras hat sich ausgeführt der teichen dem chuvna neder, that you fulfill the neder as long as the teichen of the neder, as we said before, the part of the posik van sisik asher nedarta, the first part, Mitzvah Tishmer, is a part that you have to keep your words. But Tziso, Kasher Nedarto, is the Teichen of the Neder. So now we understand. So, and this is a posik specifically written by Negei and Nidrei Hegdish, because by Nidrei Hegdish, the Teichen is what's important. That this is a Korban Lashem, or Tzedakah. I feel about this is not Genoy Kifi Mitzvah Secher, even if it's not exactly like you said. So by Nidrei Iser, which is Korbanos, there the main thing is a Teichen. And that's why you bring the posik kasher darta, which that brings out that you have to keep the teichen. But so that's an extra word to why the Rambam paskins that you're yetzer. And the reason we said, why does the Rambam paskin if you set cotton and you bring a godel, you're yetzer? So we said the reason is because we're looking not at the words that you said, but the teichen fits to what we're saying now. That by nidre isa, we see in the Rambam, he calls that part of the posik, which is the teichen, because nidre isa, the teichen counts. So as long as you bring it, you said you're going to bring a korban. And even though you said keves and you meant keves, and it's not included in the big one. But klolas, the teichen is any type of korban. The chatchila should be the one you said. That's why the chatchila you can't bring the big one. But the diavad, if you brought the big one, is also because it's not included in what you meant, but it's included in the concept of your neder. The bir b'zeh b'pnimis enyonim, the explanation in the way it's al pnimius and deeper pshat. So you do as a korban is maloshem kiruv. We know korban is from the word kiruv, means closeness. The teichnin in karbonis is what's the meaning of karbonis? Posek says odom ki yakriv mikem korban lashem lavaya. The posek says if a person will be makriv amongst you a korban. Now chassidus taiches, and the Alter Rebbe said, and the Rebbe puts in the word odom ki yakriv. If a person wants to get close, mikem, you need tzorech liyas, you have to bring a korban from yourself. The main thing about korban is not the animal, the main thing of korban is that you get yourself closer to the Eibishter. Those for the Eid wird neskarev zum Eibishter, that the fact that the Eid gets closer to the Eibishter, is mekarev u'makrev zan yakeches v'chushim zum Eibishter. He's closer and his makrev sacrifices his attributes and his senses to everything to Hashem. Und das ist der Chiluk zwischen Karbonis and andere mitzvahs. This is also a difference between Karbonis, it's a mitzvah, but Karbonis is something different than other mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are an Eiberim and Gittin Protim. Mitzvahs are specific limbs and specific arteries. We know Ramach mitzvah says Ramach Eiberim, the 248 positive mitzvahs are connected, the 248 limbs of a person. Shasa, Shin Samachay, 365 mitzvahs, lace, the negative mitzvahs are connected, Shasa Gidin, connected, parallel to the 365 veins, arteries, whatever it is. With jeder mitzvah, every mitzvah that you do, you get connected to Hashem. Mitzvah is maloshen tzaf, but mitzvah comes from the word connection. So every mitzvah you do, verbindt men befrad dem Ever or the Git proti mit dem Ebersten. So whatever mitzvah is connected to this, whatever part of the body is connected to this mitzvah, so you connect that part of the body. So the Rebbe is in the order of 54, besides that, you connect generally to the Eibishter. But the main thing is, it's specific part of a person gets connected to the Eibishter. By mitzvah sesa, it's the limbs, and by mitzvah leisa, it's the arteries. The inyan karbonis aber is teichne. What's the teichne of karbonis? For the id gets a chavek in ganzen vet kulin niskarat zum Eibishter. Korban means a general thing. He's giving himself up to Hashem. That's what karbonis are. Das is mut gescheichlet in Bira Ramban in dem Tam von Karbonis was takonis em chaper. You see that it's hinted or stressed in the Ramban's explanation when he gives a reason why if you bring a korban, it forgives you. Person did an Aveda, just take an animal, bring them Mizbeach, a korban, he forgives you. Why? So this is what the Ramban says. Sheyach shebe odom, a person has to whole think. Ba'aseise kol eila, when you do all the things with the korban, kichotel lekol begufa benafshe. He has to realize he sinned to Hashem with his body and with his soul. So really deserves that his blood should be spilled. V'yesarev gufe, his body should be burned. Lule chesed abere, if not for Hashem's kindness, shelokach man etmura, the Eibush that took an exchange. Domei da korban tachas domei, the blood of the korban instead of his blood. Nefesh tachas nefesh, the life of the korban instead of his nefesh. That means that korban is b'mokim gufa b'nafshos. Every korban is in place of his whole body, means he's connected to his whole body and his whole nefesh. But in them gitter iber sein ganzen gufa nefesh Hashem, because if a korban represents, you give yourself over completely, not in detail. That's number one. Even more than that, the main thing of karbonis is that brings you to, you have to do tshuva when you bring a korban. As it's understood from the Ramban, that you have to think that you did an aveira and you want a kapora, so you're doing tshuva. But tshuva is a ma'ila mekol mitzvahs. Tshuva is higher than all the mitzvahs. Und der Rebbe werden alle tshuva nismal alle b'gomim was eine geworden durch die aveiras v'heder kima mitzvah sese. How could tshuva forgive if you do an aveira, whether you don't do a mitzvah sese or you do a mitzvah sese, and there is some pgam, some blemish in the shama, there's some hole there, some void. How do you forgive it and fill up the void? Through tshuva. That means that tshuva is higher than all the mitzvahs. So tshuva is, even though it happens to be one of the specific mitzvahs, but the teichon of tshuva is a general idea of the person doing tshuva to Hashem, which fits to what the Ramban said, that it's the general person. Fits to what the Rebbe said before, that the korban is your general giving yourself over to Hashem. Yesh leima, so you could say the Rebbe says, Ados eich einer from the time it was Parshas HaKabonis, Heipsucham et Kabonis Aboim, and then the Ritova. This explains also a different thing. Why the whole Parsha of Kabonis and Parsha of Vayikra starts with Kabonis that the person donates, whether it's a neder and the dove donates. The Rashi zog gleich bescholos haParsha. Rashi says right in the beginning, the karbonis nedova diber inyan. That this inyan in the beginning of the Parsha talks about karbonis nedova that you donate. When the nochi the Torah mamshe bekorban chatos v'osham karbonis chayv. And after that, the Torah talks about chatos and osham, which are karbonis that certain situations you must bring it. Wouldn't it make sense the opposite? First, you talk about what you must do. Then you say that other than that you don't have to do, but you can do. Why does it start with karbonis that you want to give to donate? So the Rebbe says, "Val the inyan in karbonis is was like the zevet eight sky of Kul Hashem." What's the inyan of karbonis? That you, like we said before, you bring yourself closer completely to Hashem. That concept is expressed not as much in karbonis that you have to bring, like karbonis that you give because you want to. Because it's not so much in karbonis chayvim, it's adem was is a chayv. You're bringing it because you have to. You're an obligation. Herzich niton in them beikir dem kiyim tzivi Hashem to bringen achatos und deroshem afachet geitze beze. Herzich on beikir. I said neat. What do we feel when you bring a korban chatos? The Eibusher told you must. So what do you do it? Why? So beikir is the Eibusher told me to do it. So I'm doing it. That's what you feel. But where do you feel that you're doing it because you want to give yourself over? Where do you feel it? In karbonis nedova. That's why it starts with nedova. That's the introduction to the concept of karbonis. This will explain also another deeper shot. And if you promise a small one, you bring a big one, you are yetzer. Why? When a person donates a korban, as we explained, it's not because he wants to fulfill a certain specific mitzvah. The mitzvah that you have to keep, whatever you say, that's not why. Nor kanal der inyan akloli from makrav sein sich in ganzen avegem sich zum Eibishter. We assume that's what he means. He wants to give himself completely over to Hashem. B'losher Razal, like the Chazal said, when he gets some loshem nefes v'shtei b'korb mincha shel nedova. When it says he bring a korb mincha, someone donates a mincha, it says nefesh. If a nefesh will do it. So why does it say the word nefesh? Other places, if a person will, because Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu midar kelahove mincha oni ma'ilani olav kilikar nafshel lefonai. Who brings a mincha? A very cheap korban. A poor man. When a poor man brings it, I consider it as if he gave his nefesh. So right away from here we see that we connect nefesh to that when you bring a korban, you're giving over your nefesh. But the Rebbe adds, the shleimer adei sofer ma'ilani olav is l'mal yusah. No, when we say he's giving a small korban, which is a chassan. Nevertheless, the Eibusha says, since he doesn't have any more money, he's giving up, so he's giving up his nefesh. The Rebbe says, no, when the Gemara says, I consider it as if he's giving his nefesh, it means paket amayle. I consider it means the Eibusha makes it. As I wrote in them, that the fact is giving his nefesh is by a korban mincha, the Eibush, I consider it as nefesh. In other words, I help him. Hashem gives him an extra push to give up his nefesh. Sein hikrim nafsh is noch mehr wie es kenz that when he gives up his nefesh to a korban mincha, I'm pushing it more that it could be more than what he could do himself. Es kum zu was HaKadosh Baruch by Lolav, the Eibusher even adds to it. That's even a higher madrega. But Mele, since we're saying that by a korban the person gives away his nefesh, is the key from the mitzvah protis do verte nichlel and the mitzvah klolis. So when you do this mitzvah of neder, which is a mitzvah, specific mitzvah, is included in the general mitzvah, the Saf Tzachibra Kloli from the Midden. In the connection, every mitzvah is a connection, but every mitzvah is a connection in individual things. But here by Korban, in addition to the mitzvah, which is a connection, you have the general connection of a Yid from the Midden. Now, they need was but by bringing the karbonis, and you connect yourself to the Eibishter. And the Riber is done the gay beaker the Teichmin Kloli. That's why by karbonis, when you make a nether of karbon, what counts more is the general idea. Das, was der Ried geht sich weg im Ganzen, b'meile wird in Eskar of Hashem l'gam. He gives himself over completely. And that fits even deeper than what we said before. We said before, but why is he Yetzer? Because the Rabbanan don't look at the words, they look at the Teichen, and the Teichen Kloli is because the Teichen Kloli that he wants to give himself to Hashem. So now the Rebbe says, even deeper, that's the whole concept of a korban. Whole concept of a korban, give yourself over completely. Or Mele, give yourself completely. So we look at the teichen of what you're doing. The teichen of what you're doing includes anyone, whether it's even if it's a bigger one, you are yetzer. Why? Because the Peil Mamish, this is what really is included, not in what you had in mind, included in the concept of being makir v'korban. The Rebbe said, based on this, I could explain another point. We use the lashon cotton and godel, that he promised a cotton, a small one, he's giving a godel. Now, Yeruchnis and you know what it means. But when you start your service of Hashem, you're small, you're in the low madrege. The Balda Barados is verbunden mit Inyan HaKarbonis, but you're starting to serve Hashem through Karbonis, mit Niskara ven nafshe kulit zelakus, and Korban, we said before, means you're giving over your whole nefesh to Hashem. Umakrev zayin zich, you give over yourself. It is verbunden mit Kira v'Korban the kuli, Godel. Godel is bigger. Godel means, in other words, he's using the word Godel as the whole concept, the whole general idea of the korban, that's called Godel. So you start up with a cotton, but what happens? Because you're doing it for a korban, you're talking alon madrege, but you include it, you get connected to the Godel. Al derech hamavoy in the shaychas v'shin yira tato kabbalah seil m'dira ilo. It says in Chassidus, the connection, there's two levels of yira. Yira being afraid of Hashem. Now there's a lower level and there's a higher level, but it says in Chassidus that they're connected. And the kuda is the same. Yira has one nekuda that you have Kabbalah sale of Deibishter. That itself could be in higher and lower, but the nekuda is whatever is there on the higher level of Yira Yilah, the higher level, is there already in a certain way in the lower one. So here also, when you start off your Aveda of Karbanis, you're donating a korban, you're getting a cotton because you're a cotton. But this is going towards the becoming a godel, which means to the general Kabbalah sale that you have. The Rebbe behavi godel. Therefore, the Rebbe says the lotion is you promise the cotton and you bring a godel. So the Rebbe teaches you bring a godel means it brings you to become a godel. Das bringt zu der Akrove v'kiru beifon shekadel. It brings you to be close to Hashem in the godel way, which means in the general big way. Und eich begilu v'kol cheiches nafshe v'ter in ganzen iskaref Hashem, and in a revealed way and with all your keiches, you become completely close to Hashem. Und the cheise b'teres hakarbonah, by us getting involved in learning the dinim of karbonis. The Gemara says it's like as if you brought your korban. If you learn about karbonis and you talk about karbonis, it's like you brought the korban. And it says also in Gemara, the Gemara says that Talmid HaChachamim who learned the halachas of the Aved in the Beis Hamikdash, the Eibishter considers it as if the Beis Hamikdash was built in their time. And I guess the Rebbe stresses the words Maila Leim, similar to what he said before, when he gave the Oni with the Mincha, that means there's a special Nasinas Keich B'Maila, that it's as if you have the Beis Hamikdash built. And from them Ki'ilu, says that's as if the Beis Hamikdash was built, that the Nibna Mikdash Mepeil, the Beis Hamikdash is actually built. That will be this will bring the building of the Beis Hamikdash Mepeil, the Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, coming of Mashiach, the Shom, and there comes the next, but it says, Hevi hikrif korban. You bring a korban, you build a Beis Hamikdash, and after you build a Beis Hamikdash, you bring a korban bepale. So it goes as the Gemara says, it's like you build a Beis Hamikdash, then it's actually built, then you actually bring a korban, and like it says, nakrif v'fanecha. You say them as a nakal v'necha mitzvah tzenecha. Goes even more, not just to bring a korban. We say in davening that when Mashiach will come and will have the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, we will be makri for you like the mitzvah tzenecha. So it says in Chassidus, the Rebbe in the order brings Teres Chaim and Bekochav and the Rebbe Marash. So it says that means to say that when Mashiach will come, then the korbanos will be kemitzvah zeritzanecha. Then is the real will of Hashem, the real concept of korbanos is them, which means it's a higher madrege than korbanos that he brought till now. So we're bezeicha through our getting involved in korban and bezeicha to reach that madrege. That'll be Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, third Beis Hamikdash Yibone B'Meir B'Yemein Mamish, which will be built very, very soon in our times.